There was just another matter that I think is worthwhile presenting within this seminar on the general principles of Kabbalah. And I'd like to kind of draw the gap and bridge between things that we experience in our everyday environment, life, and science. Whether Kabbalah has been neglected, maligned, and trivialized, nevertheless, Kabbalah endures. In fact, despite voluminous empirical scientific evidence to the contrary, contemporary man still seems to cling tenaciously to arcane traditions and ancient supernatural beliefs. In this age of technological wonders, all manners of spiritual and metaphysical doctrines and practices still thrive and flourish. There's got to be a reason. Even scientists, long considered the most rational among us, are by no means immune to this magnetic lure of metaphysics. Einstein credited intuition, in fact, as the key factor when he discovered his theory of relativity. But what was even more remarkable is in the remaining years of his life were spent in a search of a simple, elegant formula by which to explain the workings of the universe within the framework of a single unified principle. If we made an effort today to try and make an attempt to read all that there is to read on physics, I guess we'd need several lifetimes. And then, at the end of almost every book on physics, there is the old familiar closing and conclusion. But we're really not sure. It's really not certain. There's got to be some simple explanations that by at the end of these new revolutionary Kabbalistic ideas, we don't have to conclude like the scientists, but we're really not sure or certain. From a Kabbalistic worldview of our universe, things are rather very simple, and they kind of explain away everything. In fact, generations of physicists and biochemists have today taken up the gauntlet and the search for a gut, or what is known as the Grand Unified Theory. And that search continues to this very day. And we are going to ask right now, is science only now learning what metaphysics has known all along? For anyone who has entered the sanctuary of Kabbalah, the answer can only be emphatic in the affirmative. In these fast-paced and fragmented times, bombarded as we are with sensory stimuli, what pure pleasure it gives one to enter the refuge of an ancient tradition, which is at the same time really so simple, so logical, and yet so complete. Here, and only here, where the mighty cult of progress holds no sway, we find a life-affirming doctrine which transcends the intellect without, and I repeat, without denying the mind. Yet Kabbalistic and scientific methods are by no means mutually exclusive. The laws governing the realm of the metaphysical must not and can never oppose those of the physical world. They are one and the same. And far from being a mere escapist panacea by which to avoid the so-called real world of what is, Kabbalah is a very much a part of the world of today. Science and Kabbalah might aptly likened to two parallel streams which sprang from a common source and whose waters will once again mingle when they meet the sea. And therefore, I feel it important that we touch upon something which is known as quantum physics. Quanta, from the literal or simple meaning, is taking all things together, like they're all part of one package. And from a Kabbalistic point of view, quantum physics and consciousness are deeply connected. In fact, the familiar Copenhagen interpretation of the new quantum theory ended the classical idea of objectivity. The idea that the world and all its galaxies had a definite state of existence, independent of our observing it, came to abrupt halt. This appears to contrast with our ordinary experience of the environment, which supports the classical view of objectivity that declares things go on even if we do not perceive it. That's the way most of us, or let's say most laymen, view the environment. And yet, we're today trying to be, or there's an attempt by the scientists to convince we, the laymen, that you see that chair standing in the corner, so long as I do not observe it, that chair is, for all intents and purposes, a non-existent entity. Sounds strange. And from an advanced Kabbalistic study, what scientists still do not understand, but yet they consider that to be today a fact, like the statement that a footprint observed on a beach today may very well be made by someone tomorrow. That too, while it seems highly incomprehensible, both to us and the scientist, from a Kabbalistic point of view, it is understandable and comprehensible. But I would like to touch on some of the more simpler matters in the relationship between consciousness and the environment that we observe. When we wake up in the morning, everything around us seems to exist much as we left it the day before. Yet, the new age of physics maintains that if we look closely at the real world, at the level of the thinking atom, because proton and electron are not merely inanimate entities, but rather the proton is a thought intelligence of sharing. The electron is a thought intelligence of a desire to receive. When we begin to look at the real world at the level of thinking, because Is there anything that exists in this universe, created by man, that a prior thought did not exist? Then its actual state of existence should really depend on how we observe things. And taking it one step further, on how we choose to see those very same things. Today, science has given us the unprecedented power to peer inside the atom. Yet the questions we are asked are essentially identical with those asked eons ago. Maybe the wording has changed a little, but many questions still remain. In spite of the fact that for the first time in history, man is on the verge of unraveling some of the great universal mysteries and revealing the truths for which we have been searching. And scientists want to understand precisely what the universe is made up of and how it runs. The one mystery that persists and simply doesn't want to go away lies in wave-particle dualities. Well, what does this mean in layman's language? Well, atomic objects like electrons, protons, and neutrons sometimes behave like particles, and at other times they behave like waves. On a physical level, this is quite understandable. Take the atoms in the air. They seem to be like waves, spread over space. When they become manifest, let's say in a table, they behave as a particle or a lump of atoms. So sometimes they behave one way and sometimes another. The wheels of the universe turn as if indifferent to our being there. Yet, one of the most important aspects of reincarnation is the affirmation of free will. The restrictions placed upon us in our present lifetime are direct results of mistakes and errors of past lifetimes. And while we seem to be convinced of the astral and impelling forces, and where, to a certain extent, free will seems to be non-existent because everything is predetermined, where is consciousness? And how does consciousness and free will play a part in our daily life? Does it mean everything because of a prior incarnation, let's assume, so everything has been already predetermined? And where are we in this whole scheme? The matter is that from a Kabbalistic point of view, nothing in this universe exists without the interference of the thought consciousness of man. And it depends completely and solely on human activity. Like in a light bulb, you've got two polarities that seem to be opposing forces, and yet, when the filament becomes functional, the central column, which means restriction, that restriction causes circuitry. And what a paradox. You imagine that from a Kabbalistic point of view, man's sole purpose is to restrict because by virtue of his restriction, he's going to receive. So that means when I have lack, when I have suffering, I've got to take it upon myself to ignore it. Some Kabbalists even were ecstatic with the pain and suffering that came their way, because that was the paradox of our universe. There would be no fragmentation. Everything becomes unified. The aspect of creating that gut, the grand unification theory from a Kabbalistic point of view, is that one thought intelligence called restriction. To restrict. Can you imagine? But isn't God there to share everything with us? Doesn't he want us to be happy? But let us never forget the aspect of bread of shame. Why are we here? To remove bread of shame. I want to feel that I have created something. That is totally illusionary. That is correct. It is illusionary. However, the purpose of creation was to create an illusion of space. Is there space out there? Is there space within an atom? Space within a room? Then the answer is no. What we seem to observe as space is merely the beneficence, the light. Because of Tzimtzum, the original restriction, there was an agreement between the light and the vessel, meaning ourselves. But because of bread of shame, you light, you creator, don't force me to accept your beneficence. I want to feel, even if it's only an illusion, I want to feel as if I have created the revelation of light. And so, in effect, a dark room is not really a dark room with the absence of light, but rather the light remains in a potential state no different than the atom. The wave aspect. You see, the wave aspect gives you the quanta effect. It's all connected. Everything is interrelated. In fact, everything is merely a web of the all-embracing reality. But to permit us, by illusion, to feel that we can command our destiny, and that ego within us tells us day in and day out that whatever is accomplished through your hands, you and only you alone have made it appear, have made it become a reality. But that reality began and existed long before you made it revealed. The act of now revealing is like the footprint on the sandy beach. That footprint was there potentially long before that man will ever step on that footprint and make it manifest. The same way as suffering, which indicates what? Lack. Something missing. The only way that we can create a revelation of beneficence, remove darkness, remove suffering, bring peace on earth and goodwill towards our fellow man, is by one thought intelligence in a simple, single word called restriction. There's your grand unifying theory. Restriction. It's the paradox, but everything in this universe is a paradox. The atoms are in the table. The chair is there. The chair is made up of atoms. It's not there until I think it's there, because essentially, what is the chair if not 99% of atoms. And so the thought that I'm trying to leave you with here is that if you're really bent on improving your own lifestyle, if you're really serious on not only creating light within yourselves, removing the empty space, the illusionary empty space, because the light is there in that very same place where you observe it as an illusion of space, it's all there. When you look at suffering, it is the absence of light. Only because you dictated at the time of restriction that you be given the opportunity, the free will, to be able to make that manifest. It's all been predetermined. At the end of the road and the end of the show, there will be no empty space. There will be no suffering. But that's the way you grow. Because of bread of shame, we demanded, we made that interference in the cosmic process, that there be an illusion of what appears to us to be a lack or empty space. This is a paradox. We're supposed to restrict. We're supposed to say, I don't want. But if I don't want, how will I get? I'm negating the very thing that I so desperately need. But take a look at the light bulb. The negative pole draws that electricity in. And that light should light up. But in effect, what's happened? What happens? The filament, functional, will create the circuit of energy. And there's another observation I'd like to leave with you this evening. And that is, when you look at the unlit bulb, you see the filament, you see the two poles. That's illusionary, you see. Because within that light bulb, the potential light that will appear after you flip that switch is there and present now. The proof of it is that when you flip that switch and the light shines, a phenomena takes place. You don't even notice the empty space. You don't even notice the components that make up the circuitry of this electric bulb. You don't see the positive and negative polarities, the poles. You don't see the filament. All you see is light. This is the new direction that we're going to have to take. Science has established this principle without even knowing that Kabbalah has known this for a long, long time. To create light, to remove lack, to create beneficence, and remove empty space, we have no choice. We have no choice but to remove that empty space.